Geoff's Wonderland.
Welcome to my Wonderland, everyone, the only weekly podcast that keeps itself nice and short in a desperate effort not to put you to sleep. And in the next 10 to 15 minutes, I'll take you on a voyage of alternative thinking from which you may never fully recover. Now, if you're new to the show, my name's Geoff Healy. I'm an Australian piano entertainer, musician, singer-songwriter, comedian, amateur barista, and maybe one or two other things which aren't quite as flattering. Anyway, on with the show. I went to a boarding school in Australia for my high school years, which I mostly enjoyed, although it did feel a bit strange to be living at the school when my family home was only about a 10-minute drive away. It could simply have been that my parents felt it was worth paying to get rid of me for a few years, which would have been understandable, but they always maintained that they believed it would result in a better education experience for me. And I think it absolutely did. I think also that it's natural for kids to be messy in the beginning, when they're little. And they grow up and, mum makes your bed and cleans up after you at the breakfast table and whatnot. And one thing that boarding school told me, or rather taught me, was to be tidy. But I have to say, some of my schoolmates never seemed to catch on to this. It was almost as if they saw untidiness as a way of life, maybe even a badge of honour, a rebellion against the standards of society, if you will. And I wonder if, to this day, a lot of them still live in absolute squalor, not because they have to, but because they choose to. These, of course, might also be the same people who are really happy to get to old age and get to use diapers again. Not because they need to, but because they never really lost interest in the idea. Anyway, those of you who've been following the Wonderland have no doubt noticed that I sometimes take the liberty of jumping from one topic to another without too much warning. And this is just one of those occasions as we crack the seal on a brand new episode of Theory Time.
You can't know what you can't know. I'm going to tell you what I think I know. And I know what I know. This is what I know. Theory Time.
And with that rather spooky introduction, we slide straight into Theory Time, which isn't spooky at all. Now, although this topic has nothing to do with what I've just been talking about, it is, however, related to the subject of last week's Theory Time, which was windows. And today we're going to take an in-depth look at, yes, that's right, curtains. Now, my gigs in Norway over the years have included several stints in the far northern town of Tromsø, in both summer and winter. And there does seem to be a tendency for the people up there to build houses featuring large living room windows with absolutely no curtains, blinds or shutters whatsoever. Now, you don't see this as much in the cities as you do in some of the towns like Tromsø. In summer, the Tromsø sun never sets. It just goes round and round in the sky directly above you. And in winter, there are basically two choices: rather dark or pitch black, depending on the time of the day. And no doubt the people up there want to get as much of whatever daylight there is into the house for as long as they possibly can. On the other hand, it's widely believed that Scandinavians generally are more liberated in certain respects towards things like nudity, etc., etc. And so maybe the residents in Tromsø are simply saying, well, if you want to look into my window while I'm walking around with nothing on, that's your problem. I personally think that's a good, healthy attitude for a person to take whilst feeling comfortable with their own bodies in their own homes. And do we overuse curtains generally? Well, yeah, I think we do. In much the same way as we overuse walls and fences. But of course, it's also about security, depending on where you live. And even though I do applaud Norwegians for being comfortable with their bodies, I also wonder if, quite often, curtains offer more protection for whoever's outside than whoever's inside. Nowadays, if I see a window without curtains in Norway or anywhere else, particularly a bedroom window, I will be more likely not to look into it, for fear of seeing something less than attractive, which I may never be able to unsee. I think my first and last visit to a nudist beach on the Caribbean island of St. Martin actually taught me all I really need to know about this. And that is, just because you're allowed to be naked in public doesn't mean you should be.
This is what I know. Theory time.
And on that cautionary note, we shuffle quietly away from theory time for another week, having been exposed, once again, to the naked truth. Well, it's now time for us to put down the binoculars as we once again dig into my musical back catalogue in Song of the Day.
And today we're not going to go back very far at all, actually. No, because we're actually going to listen to a bit of a brand new song. This one's the newest single from my new album, which is called Mixed Bag, and it was released this week on the streaming services. A song about how people sometimes tend to go about things completely the wrong way. Kind of like, getting in your car to travel to a place in the far north, but insisting on driving south. So anyway, without any further ado, here it is, and it's called Barking Up the Wrong Tree.
You're barking up the wrong tree. Nobody knows but me. You look but you never see. You're just barking up the wrong tree. You're getting tired of being inspired by people that you'll never be. Say you're tired of doing things people never seem to see. Baby, that's where you're wrong.
You're mistaken
When you said you don't belong,
you're only thinking
it could have really just been me. Barking up the wrong tree. Slipping on the same old shoes. I'm reading all the same old news. Nothing changes downtown. It just goes round and round and up and down. Agonizing over songs that no one's ever gonna hear. When you whisper in my ear, it seems you all just disappear. Now you're taking all your dirty clothes someplace that nobody knows, and you're playing with the stereo. Better try to keep the volume nice and low. But that's where you're wrong.
you'd be mistaken.
When you say you don't belong,
You're only thinking
it could have really just been me who's barking up the wrong tree. You can paint your pretty face, but it won't hide who you are. You tell me things are different now, but you're the same to me anyhow. You are.
barking up the wrong tree. Yes, you are barking up the wrong tree. And if you'd like to hear the rest of that song, or indeed the rest of my new album, you can do that by going to any of the streaming services, including YouTube, where you will also find all of my other musical creations to date, recorded at different times in different countries and written about all sorts of different and interesting things. Now, whilst pretty much everything I've ever recorded is available to purchase on iTunes/Apple Music, and I think from a few other outlets, I realised that not everybody can afford to do that. So I decided a little while ago to make the best stuff available to everybody for free on my website. So you can go there, you can listen to it there, you can download it, you can share it. Yeah, just have fun with it. And the website, of course, is www.geoffhealy.com. Okay, so throughout the course of our lives, we are constantly being reminded or advised to be aware of our surroundings, to be mindful of the plight of our planet, our environment, and, of course, our fellow man or woman, and to be consciously and consistently grateful for the good things in our lives.
I would like to suggest that whilst these reminders are usually well-intentioned, to a large extent they're also not terribly realistic, because most of us are inextricably caught up in the hustle and the bustle of modern life, and very often we do take things for granted. But I'd like to think that most of us do our best because, we've all got places to go, people to see, things to do, money to earn, friends to amuse, and it's literally impossible to always stop and think about everyday items and situations. And that, Wonderlanders, of course, is where the Wonderland comes in. Because as I've said before, I contemplate things to which the average human being, given the priorities of their existence, would quite understandably not bother wasting 5 minutes thinking about ever. And with that in mind, we have now arrived at Contemplation Central. Yes, it's
Geoff's thought of the day.
I was thinking about something. I think it was the thought of the day. I think it was the thought of the day.
And welcome to Thought of the Day, where we consider really weird stuff so you don't have to. All right, I've got one word for you, folks. Containers. Now, I'm not quite sure at what point or why this subject came up for me yesterday, but when I gave it a little bit of thought, I realised that our entire lives revolve not around money, not around popularity, not around our quest for healthy and delicious fast food with no carbon footprint whatsoever, and not even around whether anyone is going to remember us after we're dead. No. Our entire lives, whether we realise it or not, revolve around containers. You see, before there were humans, there were containers. Now that might sound ridiculous, but bear with me. And as soon as men and women turned up on planet Earth, suddenly even more containers were needed and were thus created. And not just because we needed things to put other things into. What I'm suggesting here is that because anything that holds anything or contains anything is, by definition, a container, the future of our species was destined to focus on a variety of different variations on this theme. And when Earl Silas Tupper and Brownie Wise first hit upon the idea of organising women's parties for the distribution of his revolutionary, well-made and airtight but rather expensive plastic containers, we may have thought that this was something of a defining moment in container terms. But as popular and useful as Tupperware has turned out to be, no, not really. Because so many things that we do not consider to be containers are in fact containers. For example, a spoon is a container because it contains food. A glass is a container, a plate is a container, a car is a container because it contains people, as is a house and a building and a ship and a plane. Every single thing in your house or wherever you go is by nature a container because every material thing you can think of contains either things or at least chemical elements or molecules and is therefore a container. And just because you can't see what's inside a container doesn't mean it doesn't contain something. So, as you travel through life, people, remember that everything you see and everything that you use and everything you value, love, hate, or put leftovers into is a container. And something doesn't even have to be a physical entity to be a container. Even the Wonderland is a container. What does it contain? Complete rubbish, you might reasonably suggest.
Gotta get back to Geoff's Wonderland.
Right? And so there
Gotta come back to the Wonderland. Geoff's Wonderland. The Wonderland.
their effectiveness and, of course, what they contain. To illustrate, if it's leftover chicken, veggies or pasta sauce, is it still any good?
I think it was the thought of the day.
And that puts the clear, airtight plastic lid on Thought of the Day for another week, and of course, also brings today's show to a close. I hope you've enjoyed our journey today, and remember, there will be more groundbreaking theories, thoughts, and observations well into the latter part of the 21st century, unless, of course, there's a serious accident. In the meantime, please do subscribe or follow The Wonderland if you haven't already, and if you'd like to get in touch with me for any reason, please drop me a line at www.geoffhealy.com. For now, though, it's farewell from me, and I'll be back bright and early next Friday with yet another revolutionary episode of My Wonderland.
Gotta get back to Geoff's Wonderland. Gotta come back to the Wonderland. Geoff's Wonderland.